Cynicism is just another form of cowardice.
Give the face for a reason.
For our sergeants are not interested in our midlife crisis. We were to do our freaking work.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. It's crazy. As he's taller than Spike.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 8 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze heavy hitters in the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and systems, more importantly, so that you can take those and apply those to your life. Those heavy hitters range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of state to other divergent thinkers who just generally dominate their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we're going to be hearing from Wayne Mars, and Wayne Mars is absolutely enigmatic and singular and one of the most impressive people I've ever come across. I met him in the middle of nowhere, McCarthy, Alaska. He's run a guide service. He's done river rafting. He's traveled the world. He's dived with whales. This guy is one of those people that does absolutely everything, and he has a mountain of information to share, and I hope that you enjoy listening to this podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it. So, and maybe I'll give a little context to it. You and I, and the reason I asked you to come here, we met in McCarthy, Alaska, which is probably, it was about as close to the middle of nowhere as I think you can actually get while still having a supply chain of some sort. And you were, here's this guy much older than the people he's working with. And I'm not saying that it's obvious, but you know, you're clearly the head of the pack, and a lot of guys your age aren't doing the type of work that you were doing. And they're not running around with people in their early 20s doing, you know, running a guide business and actually being out there with that in the thick of it, and then living in somewhere like McCarthy, Alaska for extended periods of time. So, you know, how is it that you came to do that when basically that is the dream of many veterans when they're getting out of the military? Is they're like, I'm going to go live in the middle of nowhere and be a guide, and I'm going to run a guide business. I'm going to take people hunting and take people fishing and rafting, and I'm just going to have fun now. How did you pull that off?
Well, mostly it's about dealing with inconveniences, tenacity, and just being stubborn. But my path started, originally when I was a young man, like most young men, I thought, I got to make a lot of money. So I talked to a family friend, said, hey, I want to make a lot of money. What's my quickest path to that? And I think at the time he told me that I could be a chiropractor, an insurance salesman, or a real estate agent. Chiropractor I was originally interested in, but as I started looking into it, kind of sounded like a sham. Insurance agent sounded boring as hell. So I went for realtor, jumped right into real estate, had the first job at 17 or 18. Was a runner at a brokerage and worked my way up, eventually got my broker's license, and was definitely on a career path for doing quite well. But it only took me, 6 years to realize that I was hitting financial goals, but I wasn't any happier.
Yeah.
I felt like there was more in life.
All right.
So I bailed on real estate, was kind of drifting, started a couple tiddlywink businesses because I always thought it'd be interesting to own a business. They really didn't go anywhere. And then I had a friend who had a print shop, and he was struggling, so he asked for my help. So I jumped in there, and I was pretty good with money. Had a good head on my shoulders. So
yeah.
We took his struggling business and turned it into a very successful print shop. I don't know, tripled or quadrupled the revenue, probably doubled the profits during my tenure.
Nice.
Which was great. But, once you get your buddy back on his feet, you realize that just helping other people isn't quite enough either.
Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, I'm approaching 30. It's probably time to get serious about doing a career for me. So always loved the outdoors, especially I was an avid rock climber, loved skiing. So I thought, maybe I'll own a sporting goods store. I like businesses, selling outdoor stuff. Maybe that's it. So I got a job at a sporting goods store thinking, I'll learn the industry from the inside and then see what I can do.
Yeah.
And quickly realized, now I'm just selling stuff to people to go have fun. This isn't all that interesting. But during that, had a little exposure to sales reps for outdoor companies as well as guides. They would come through. A lot of them were past guides, actually. So saw some other potential avenues, but didn't think much about it. Just felt like I hit a cul-de-sac of a career. So then I said, all right, well, here I am, almost 30. I've always wanted to travel, haven't done squat. So it's time to hit the road. So sold a bunch of stuff, worked 3 jobs to save up money, and saved up enough to take a year off. And I made my way from Alaska down to Panama.
Oh, wow.
So figured I'd start with concentric circles and visit stuff that was close by. So spent most of the summer in Alaska, and it was during that trip that I stumbled across McCarthy, Alaska. As you say, it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's a weird little spot, and I liked it. It seemed interesting, and I decided right then and there I wanted to do more than just scratch the surface.
Yeah.
But that was in the summer. Kept traveling, finished up the trip that year, November, December. And then I just started vulturing for a job in McCarthy. And there were 2 guide services, 2 air taxis, and 2 lodges. So I didn't want to clean toilets, didn't know how to fly an airplane. So guide services were the obvious choice.
Yeah, well, I'd say you went the right direction if your other options were cleaning toilets, really. Yeah, and for people who may not have experienced McCarthy, Alaska, just to paint this picture a little bit, because I think you'll have a much more fine-tuned version of it than I do. Describe for me McCarthy, Alaska, just to give that motif a bit.
Yeah, so McCarthy, Alaska. When we talk about the middle of nowhere, it's actually plopped right in the middle of the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. It's the largest national park in the country, and nobody's heard about it.
Yeah,
it gets about 25,000 visitors a year. Compare that to 2 million in Denali, the popular park of Alaska, or 4 or 5 million down in the popular parks in the lower 48.
Yeah, bumper traffic.
Huge playground. Yeah, huge playground. Not many people. It was an old mining town, turn of the century. They hit a big copper deposit, so they made a railroad out to middle of nowhere to drag the copper out of the mountains. The mine closed down in the late 30s. Town went bust. Chunk of it burned down, and there was pretty much no one out there for a long time. Just a handful of hermits. So now, I'd say in the 70s, you get some hunters out there, some hippies, a few miners, prospectors, scratching around in the rocks. So you had a pretty eclectic group of people that were attracted to this place.
Yeah.
And that continues this day. So McCarthy, it's at the end of a 60-mile gravel road. That road was the old railroad bed. So they took the tracks off and called it a road. So it takes about 3 hours to drive the road. It's rugged. For years and years, the only way to get to McCarthy was drive that road and then pull yourself across on a hand tram.
Yeah, and you're pulling yourself over a river, and not a particularly tame one either.
No, it's got icebergs floating down it.
Yeah, and just hitting the bridge.
It gets rambunctious. There's a lake that drains every year that's dammed up by the glacier upstream, it's an exciting river. Of course, it freezes in the wintertime, so you can drive stuff over in the winter. For years, that's how we got our supplies over. I
still can't believe that actually freezes, because you look at that river and you think, no way. No way.
Well, one of the amazing things, one of the very amazing, interesting, dynamic things about Alaska is so many of those rivers, almost all of them are glacially fed. So even these raging 100,000 cubic feet per second rivers, it's all ice melt.
Yeah.
So when it gets cold enough that the ice starts melting, the river goes away.
Yeah.
So that raging river becomes a trickle, and then you'd not be surprised if that trickle freezes because it's just not much of a river.
I know, it's just it's such a departure. And I grew up in Oklahoma, and for me, it's such a departure, especially when I go see something like McCarthy, Alaska, where rivers never freeze where I come from, and they're like a mile wide sometimes, but they're very flat. They're moving across very flat land. You're not getting rapids. They might move swiftly, but you're not going to get washed away into the middle of nowhere. And then you go and see the rivers that are coming off of glaciers in the Wrangell St. Elias National Park, and you're just like, oh, they might not find me,
right?
Ever. Not like while I'm alive, they just might not find me. So that's the area of the world
they might not even bother, Carson.
Yeah, I know that, and I having seen that, I wouldn't blame anybody. I was like, yeah, you might die just trying. So the backdrop of the business and the lifestyle that you made for yourself is really intense, even by my standards.
Yeah,
I think that it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a funky place. It's a funky place to scratch out a living, even if you're just trying to live. Yeah. Because, of course, McCarthy is off the grid. There's no electricity. There's no running water. There's no utilities. There's no actual governing body. There's no city. There's no county. So it definitely smacks of the lawless frontier. And even with all of that, it's, I drive 8 hours to go grocery shopping.
Every time I see one of those, and you may or may not come across them, but I come across them fairly frequently on social media. Somebody's like, "Would you live in this cabin for a month without internet?" And I'm just thinking, I'm like, "There's a guy his name's Wayne Mars, and you need to talk to him before," because everybody's like, "I would totally do it. Tiny house, #forever," And I'm just like, okay, I don't think you guys really understand. And to be fair, I didn't either until I had spent a fair amount of time out in McCarthy, and even my limited time there was, you're working all day. There's no other option. So, So what is?
They call it the simple life for a reason. That's because your options and your choices are simple, because there's certain things you got to do to survive, and if you don't, you're gonna have a real hard time.
Yeah. So walk us through then a day in the life of what you're doing. You're running a guide business out of like the old powerhouse of a town that had basically been abandoned. And you have to run a profitable business in that environment. And oh, by the way, you live like a football throws distance away on a day-to-day basis. What does that day look like? Walk me through it.
Yeah, well, so, if you take all the tasks you can possibly imagine for three very distinct things in life. One, that you're actually running a business. So you've got accounting, sales, hiring people, managing, cleaning the toilets, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, you still ended up cleaning the toilets.
Yeah, that's the plight of my life. Then your homes, you can think about it as homesteading an old-timey cabin on the frontier in the wilds of Alaska. So everything you need to do for that: chop firewood, build the house, hunt game, keep the varmints out, the whole 9 yards. And then think about crossing the Himalaya. Everything you could imagine, you're backpacking up to the foothills, alpine climbing up and over, et cetera, et cetera. Take all the tasks you can imagine for those three big projects, put them all in a bag, mix them up, grab a random handful, spread them on the table. That's what my day was like. Every day was a little bit crazy. You never quite knew what was coming at you. One day I'd be slogging through accounting. The next day I'm waist deep in my powerhouse, my 100-year-old powerhouse, trying to save it from a flood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next day I'm ice climbing with 4 clients from Japan.
There
So,
really isn't a dull moment. And I was looking at some of your guides while I was out there, and I hadn't seen the look of sheer exhaustion in somebody's face like that than I had, from the guides who had gone on like the multiple week or multiple day, like the longer rafting trips, and they come back and I'm just like, you look like you survived. You look like a survivor right now. And then, and they're there all summer. And then again, here you are hooking and jabbing right along with them. And it was reminiscent to me, and why I was so awestruck is I was like, I haven't seen that look on somebody's face since I was in the military. Right? Just somebody just beat who's covered in dirt. Just all they want to think about is their shower and the next thing that they're going to eat.
Yeah, but we don't have showers, Carson.
No, I know. And they're just sitting there dreaming about it. Like, I guess I'll go jump in the river, or you could do the sauna. I will say the saunas are actually a world-class way to get clean.
They are spectacular. Yeah, no, I'm with you. The emaciated guide is something to behold, and hell hath no fury like a mountain guide at an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Oh, I bet. I mean, yeah. I feel like you could put yourself out of business if you left two of your guides alone in there unsupervised with food for too long. They just came back, no supplies.
One year we had a particularly crafty guide who somehow finagled a $99 cruise from Alaska down to Washington. Bought some weird last-minute deal, and to put a mountain guide on a Princess cruise with 7 all-you-can-eat buffets a day was just legendary.
Isn't that like one of those scenarios where somebody hasn't eaten for too long? You can't let them eat because they'll kill themselves. Like they just gorge themselves and die.
Yeah, I had a friend once who got stuck on a big rock wall in Baffin Island, and the sea ice melted away from the edge. And he was there for quite some time, went through their food, got down to eating the tea bags, and then had a few more days before a couple of caribou hunters happened to drive by. And they were able to flag him down and get off that rock. And as my buddy puts it, it was the perfect cure for vegetarianism.
I believe it. I believe, a few days of, I did what's called SEER school, and we had to do a week out in the field where basically there's no food, and they make you eat weird shit like rock trite, for example. And I promised myself I'd never put myself through that again. I was like, and I know why they did it, right? That's hazing, and not in like the mean sense, but it's like, we just got you to eat rock trite. You didn't have to eat that, but you're some dumb 20-year-old, too dumb to ask questions. I'm like, oh, damn. And so, as far as the day to day, I mean, you're up at like what, 4 or 5, going till 9 at night sometimes.
Yeah, again, all depends on the day. Probably my most typical day would be, I am actually not an early riser, so I'd try to stay in bed till 6:30 or 7, but I was quite often up till midnight.
Yeah.
So that'd be my most typical day, but all sorts of random stuff. We'd get search and rescues where we'd be up for 2 days straight. But then the Alaska summertime, when you have 22 hours of daylight, you don't realize how much that fuels your fire until it finally gets dark at the end of August.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will take these ridiculous 14-hour power naps that feel so fantastic.
Yeah, I've become a more seasonal creature since moving up to Alaska. Kind of the same thing. It's like, well, I operate in seasons now instead of days. I get a lot of things done during the summer.
So that's my typical summer time is from 6:30 or 7 until midnight. And then the winter time is a lot of replenishment and full 8 hours when I can get them.
Yeah. And you all were staying in McCarthy through the winters, correct?
I'm a summer only guy. My wife was born and raised there, and she had her share of cold, dark winters in McCarthy. So no, we actually went flying around, living in all kinds of towns in the winter, just trying to find the perfect hometown.
That's fantastic. And so tell me about the winter adventures. I mean, what were you doing? How was that functioning? How are you making that happen?
Well, in the wintertime, our season with clients is only from May through September. So in the winter months was doing all the stuff we didn't have time to do during the summer. So it was the accounting and the marketing and hiring guides for the next season and lots of reservations, lots of bookings, working on the website, all that kind of stuff. So it was absolutely full on with customer care and taking care of our staff in the summertime. And then in the wintertime, it was effectively a glorified office job.
Gotcha, administrative. But are you doing it on the road? I mean, how would you set your office up in that type of environment when you're traveling like that?
Yeah, I got pretty good. I had a little plastic carrying case that had maybe 20 folders in it, and got real good at figuring out how to get on the internet and coffee shops or just making myself comfortable in whatever environment that I had.
Gotcha. And it seems to me like keeping it simple in that type of environment is key. I mean, I'm thinking specifically towards the office component of it.
Yeah, keeping it simple is key. Also, just being organized.
Okay.
Because not only do you have this mobile aspect where you're moving a lot, moving around, traveling a lot, but also you can't really get back to McCarthy easy to grab that file that you forgot.
Yeah.
And now as life has become more digital, 20 years ago, that was incredibly challenging. Now we've been able to go more digital on stuff and it's not so problematic. But early on, it was imperative that we made sure that we brought everything we would need to make sure we could do the work we needed to do in the off season.
Yeah. And that's another thing I was impressed by is when we were talking in McCarthy, I think there would be the temptation if you're looking from the outside in, maybe I'm some businessman coming from Chicago to think, oh, look at these simple little business people here. This is adorable. And then we were having a conversation and I'm like, this guy's modernized his business to the absolute 9s and 10s because you're not making any unnecessary movement. You are utilizing modern technology to your advantage to keep your margins high. You're leveraging the ability to be mobile as a reason to keep things simple. And you had much more clarity on your business. And in my job previously was doing business consulting for other businesses in terms of identifying the risk. And you had 1,000,000 times more clarity. And I don't know, do you think that being in McCarthy contributed to that? Or is that something that you just innately had? How did you develop that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Running a business, I think, is just trial by fire, and you either rise to the occasion, get run over, or barely hang on. And I think almost every business owner goes through that trial, and you can either just hang on with the screaming banshee or get organized, get efficient, and prioritize. So, as I look over my own path, I certainly had some business experience. Real estate is somewhat self-managing. Running the print shop, I was the general manager. But I would say the vast majority of these lessons were just hard learned. Feeling like my life was completely out of control in the first few years of owning the business.
Yeah.
And just rolling up my sleeves and figuring out, how do I get this? How do I slay this beast?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. And my question for that would be, is there a time, when you're hanging on after you feel like you've just gotten run over and you're hanging on for dear life, maybe a failure or that something at the time maybe felt like a failure that turned out to be good or taught you something? Do you have like a favorite failure?
Well, it's a long list to choose from, Carson. But probably my favorite, over the time, we ran these companies for 20 years and ended up with 4 nice, profitable companies. But I guess it was 2009, we purchased another guide service that was at the other end of the big river that we raft. So they were kind of a competitor, but it seemed like a good integration of, oh, hey, now we can start the trips in McCarthy, and where we end the trips, we'll be able to have an outfit there that hopefully will turn a little profit and make our logistics easier.
Yeah.
And even I'm friendly with the other guide service in town, and I remember him telling me, "Oh yeah, that was a no-brainer when I found out you bought that." And I think we vetted it properly. We went down, met with the folks, but after the first year, it was real clear that the revenue wasn't as high as they had claimed. A lot of it was focused on a single customer, which I was not aware of even through our due diligence, or was not represented in the books. And at the end of the very first season we ran this company, that customer went out of business. So stiffed us for a bunch of cash, was real clear that company was no longer viable. So here my shiny new acquisition turned out to be a big goose egg or a big negative.
Yeah.
And we had to spin on a dime and exit as gracefully as possible. So, yeah, I smile at it because, I just thought I was so sharp with this acquisition, really thought I'd check the boxes. And it was a fantastic reminder that there are no-brainers in business.
Yeah. So you learned that lesson from that, but what was going through your mind because that's a very stark contrast from being like, yes, I nailed it, to going to, crap, this isn't working. But tell me about the opposite side of that mindset when you were really going through it. I mean, in my mind, I always feel a little level of panic there, at least for a certain amount of time. What was going through your head?
Yeah, absolutely. As the thing went down, I had a longtime employee that was looking for some room to grow in the company. So he was a big inspiration for buying the company. Mm-hmm. So that for me, I put a lot of time and energy into my people. And when you're investing in somebody that you really want to keep happy and genuinely like, and all of a sudden this opportunity is sort of fizzling, not to mention, you're hemorrhaging money. As I say, this big customer owed us a lot of money. There was absolute, panic in the air of what do we do? But when you talk about lessons learned in McCarthy, I guess something that I have learned in McCarthy and in business is, when you first start a business, you first start running a business, everything seems like the end of the world. I remember, year 2 of owning the business, the website went down for a few days, and I thought I was going to have an early heart attack. I said, oh my gosh, by customers, losing customer sales, all this sort of thing. But over the years, you just realize every business has significant setbacks, and it's much more about how you deal with them. Like you can't expect not to happen.
Yeah.
You just got to make the best of whatever it is. And sometimes the best in this situation was, okay, how can we get this stuff, the stuff we bought, how can we fire sale it? What can we recoup? What can we not recoup? What opportunities can we find for our key person down there? Can we, bring them back into our parent organization, or can I find him a new job? If I start calling around to some friends and see if I can get him a more interesting opportunity so I don't let him down. So I think in the end, that is very key it's a common lesson you learn in business is at first, everything seems like a big deal. And for all the longtime business people I know, almost nothing seems like a big deal.
Yeah, it seems to me all of the business folks that I've really admired that I've talked to over the years, it seems like at some point, and I hate to describe it like this, but it typically does come on the tail end of a failure. It's like something simultaneously breaks and then is resoldered together inside of them, where it's like their ability to worry it goes away. Because it's so counterproductive that they just eliminate that entire side of their personality almost. And it's not that they're not aware, but it just seems like that's a common thread. And it seems to me like that's what you're saying here. Is it's not that, you still have to admit a failure is a failure, but at a certain point, pragmatism's the key.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and it's easy for me to say it now. But I can say developing those calluses is very painful. But I think if you're successful in business, absolutely, what you said, what I said, you do develop that as a survival mechanism, and in reality, you start realizing it's not as big a deal as you thought.
Yeah, and
my website was down for a week. Oh, what? I might have lost some sales, but the business didn't go away. My family's still alive. It's not that big a deal. But, when I was barely making ends meet, it seemed like a huge deal. But after you pull it off, 30 times, you suddenly realize, all right, just another obstacle, and I can probably pull this one off too.
Yeah. And then it seems to me like you just start, it's not that you hunt for them. You're just like, all right, I got this. And I like the way you phrase that. Developing those business calluses is painful, and a lot of fear. Some people fear the imposter syndrome, which it doesn't seem like you've had that issue, but that scarcity mindset, like, oh my God, everything's going to fall apart, and there's going to be nothing left over, and I'll never have a business again, and nothing will ever work. And I see a lot of successful business people tend to approach it from, I'll define my fears first. Like, well, the absolute worst case scenario is this, was kind of what you described. Like, the worst case scenario would be my wife is dead, my house is on fire, and my dogs are all going to die, and I'm going to go to prison. Right. That's my worst case scenario. Well, the likelihood of that happening is not anywhere near probable. So I can handle this. And I think that actually that's a great way to start, is with that, defining what the worst case scenario would be and realizing that you're not there yet. There's a strange comfort in that. So let's talk about, we talked about failures. Let's talk about, maybe one of the best investments that you've made, either in yourself or in your business, something that really paid off that maybe you didn't even anticipate that it was going to work so well. And then it just had, some type of disproportionate effect for you.
Right. Yeah. So, something I have, since it's advice I often give people, and I look back, probably some of my bigger investments were time and energy put into tracking what I do. Sounds simple, surprisingly hard to pull off. And I've done this a few different ways. So, for instance, I have taken a week or two of my time and I track every minute I spend of every day. Was I on a phone call? Was I doing emails? Was I doing marketing? Was I taking a dump? What was happening with my day?
Yeah.
And I've done this with diet and exercise, wrote down everything that I ate, all the calories, kept track of my weight, did it with exercise. And I find that those are so helpful. Not only do I understand those things more deeply, but it also, it reveals my strengths, my weaknesses, where I can be better. It's a pretty intense self-assessment and self-education. And so that's, I guess, if you put it broadly in the, what have I invested time and money or time, energy into, that'd probably be my number one.
Yeah, I think that's very important. It seems like a lot of people want to be the boss, but they don't start by being their own boss. And tracking your own time is huge. And I agree with you. It is actually one of the hardest things to do. I've done it a number of times where I'm trying to track everything in my CRM and all the emails I sent and how many phone calls did I make and how many minutes did each one take and what was the return on investment. It's very difficult to get those types of metrics. But to your point, the clarity received is phenomenal. And I'm glad you brought up exercise and food, because I think that's something a lot of people who don't know where to start with that. And this is kind of a side shoot, but since we're talking about it, if the ability to track your food and your exercise allows you to come at it from a less emotional perspective. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah. And to understand, you can talk all day on, having high fat, high protein, whatever you're trying to strive for. How many calories a day should I be eating, this, that, or the other? Oh my gosh, does that become real when you take the time to nerd out on a spreadsheet or your little notepad on every little bit and piece of food you ate and what the composition was between carbs, protein, and fat, and how many calories you took in. You'll have an appreciation you never did.
Oh yeah.
And I like that you brought up, it's all about self-management, because so many people do not understand that when you have a job, the company, your manager, the organization you're with, no matter how good or bad it is operating or organized, it gives you a framework to operate within. And when you own a business, you are creating that framework, and being self-employed, you have to create that framework for yourself. And that is so much more difficult than anyone gives it credit for. So that self-management is very key in my mind to being a successful business owner.
Yeah. And on the difficulties of building that framework. And I've struggled with this, and I think everybody does, because there's a million different ways to skin the cat, right? None of them are necessarily wrong. Some will get you there faster, some won't. How did you go about choosing which metrics were important to you for your own self-management?
Yeah, that one I'd say just self-awareness. And, when I talk about tracking my time, that's probably where I became very aware of where I waste my time.
Gotcha.
So that's how I developed my own metrics on what was important. But, there's a lot of overlap here for having a vision for your company, goals for your own life, and how do your daily actions move you towards your goals. So there's a lot of integration there to some pretty big concepts that I think is important to be able to make those decisions. Because if you don't know where you're heading, how do you know if what you're doing is effective?
Yeah. You just end up kind of randomly flailing about and not really getting anywhere. And then you wonder, why do I not have what I want?
Right.
Yeah. So are there any tools that you would recommend to somebody who's maybe struggling with that? You said did you do it with a spreadsheet? Are you using anything more modern?
Yeah, nope. I'm a pretty simple. I'm not as techy since I'm older than, I'm 50 years old now. So certainly grown up with computers, but not as techy as your average 20 to 30 year old. So now I'm just a spreadsheet guy, simple notes programs. So when you ask, are you asking about the goals that I mentioned, or more the food tracking and exercise tracking?
Or just tracking in general? Everybody's got a different way to do it, and none of them are wrong. And if it's a spreadsheet and literally typing things in, that's great.
Yeah, I will say I wish that all this technology had been around when I was younger. And not just for the pornography. There's a lot of great tools that you can use for productivity. Oh my gosh! I wish I could do it all over again. I think it'd be even more fun with the stuff that's available.
Yeah, I will say it is. It's a lot easier to be a one-man wrecking crew if you really want to get that done, and then to be mobile, and it's totally available. I mean, the fact that we're even talking and I'm recording this with fairly minimal equipment, it just makes putting yourself out there a lot easier. Yeah, the things that you do with a spreadsheet, like there's this app called MyFitnessPal for your fitness. You can put all the exercises you've done in there, and you can scan everything that you use food wise. Assuming that you bought it at a store, even if it's an apple, right? And you can scan it in there, and it'll give you the exact macro or a pretty precise macro breakdown, and fats, and then all the micronutrients as well. And you can run linear regressions and all that, and do correlation analysis, and it's crazy what you can do.
Oh,
it's absolutely
fantastic.
Nuts.
Fantastic. And for a business, I mean, there's just so many opportunities to use technology for little competitive advantages or just understanding your business, which in and of itself is your ultimate competitive advantage. So
yeah. And understanding your business, to your point, I think you made a great point about the overlay between your personal life and your business. And I find that when people are going to start a business, a small business, at least the people I've talked to, is they're not clear on what they're trying to accomplish with their business. And to me, it seems derivative of they're not clear on what they're trying to do with their life, because they're basically going out and saying, well, I'm good at this thing, I should do that professionally. Like, well, maybe.
No, I think you are on bullseye trajectory there. One of my favorite phrases is "do not have fuzzy goals." And as you say, if your life goals are fuzzy, business goals are fuzzy, how do you even know what you're trying to get to, what you're trying to accomplish? That's by example, I have a friend who has had the same goal for decades, which is to live in a house in the mountains. And I'm always harassing her on, okay, where's the house? What town is this in? What mountains are these in? Is it by a lake? Does it have a view? Is it a log cabin? Are you going to build it yourself?
Yeah.
Come on, let's talk about this, because this is not rocket science. Living in a house in the mountains is not a difficult goal to achieve if you really want to achieve it.
Yeah.
But you got to put some thought into it.
Yep. And
the exact same thing goes for business, for life. You got to figure out what you want, which is not an easy task, but it is the most worthwhile thing you'll do in your life.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with somebody about that this very morning. And you can share your thoughts and opinions on this. Warren Buffett has said, take your top 5 things that you want, put those on a list, and anything else you can think of, write those below them and cross them off, because you shouldn't focus on them. I have mixed emotions towards that, but I think one thing that I think people get hung up on is that they think they have to have one goal or one purpose, and that has to be the driving purpose. And my thoughts on it as I get older is like, nah, not really. But you have to have a purpose within that area. And what are your thoughts on that? Multiple goals, multiple purposes.
Yeah, no, I agree. The way I personally have done my own goals is I got a little spreadsheet, and on my far right column, I have my ultimate goal. So, for instance, my ultimate goal with, I think love is one of my categories, was just to be in a happy, healthy, thriving relationship.
Right.
That was it. That I didn't know when it was going to happen, who was going to happen, no specs, anything like that. It's just, hey, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Just like with my career, my ultimate goal at one point was make a lot of money. And of course, I revisit these goals every year. And then you realize, okay, that's not enough of a goal.
Yeah.
That's just sort of a floating concept of a bunch of money.
Yeah.
What do I want to do with that money? It was a fuzzy goal.
Yep.
So I'm all about having an ultimate goal that's broad, but it speaks to the core of why you're trying to do what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
With my business, did I want a lot of money, or did I want to have fun doing it? Or did I want relationships out of it? Deep friendships, this sort of thing. Those were, and for me, at some point, my ultimate goal for my career evolved into, I want to do something I'm passionate about, but I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. So that could have been a number of things.
Yeah.
And I want to build a sense of community around that.
Yeah.
And that's really what took me into guiding. And as I say, it could have been lots of stuff.
Yeah. And
I got lots of interest.
Yeah. And I personally think that exploring those is part of the flavor. I think that people try to fit themselves into one box and define themselves by that. I think you can find unifying elements within each, right? Like me personally, I'm an action oriented person. I need action in my life. I don't necessarily care what that looks like. It could be, going out and dancing with my wife one night, and then I could be bombing down a mountain on a mountain bike the next day. And, the next day I'm playing guitar with my buddy who plays the drums. I think that you can accomplish all that as long as, to your point, the goals aren't fuzzy.
Right.
Yeah. So
I agree. And
go ahead.
I'll also throw in, there's some personalities, I think they're rare, but there are some people, they want to be an astronaut. They want to go into outer space. They devote their life to it. They might achieve it. They might not, but that's the path they need to be on. And there are those people.
Certainly.
I think much more commonly, there's people who have too broad of interest, too many interests, and not enough focus. And I think that's why a guy like Warren Buffett probably says that.
I agree.
He's trying to rein those people in and say, all right, focus a little bit here, people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've noticed within the veteran community, we have a lot more people who think that they need to be the astronaut. And they think that they need to have just the one singular focus. And like, folks, it's okay. Like, we're not so mission oriented now, but then that creates a level of chaos. And
right.
in their mind and their processes and their thinking, because they think they have to be, I have to, for me, when I came out of the Marines, I was like, I was a Marine, and the only goal was next rank. And that was it. Next qual. That's it. So that was a large departure for me, was breaking that habit of just getting funneled into one thing, because I feel like you can miss opportunities too. And to your point, the sense of community around it, building something with a sense of community baked into it has its distinct advantages. And what were the benefits of building that into your business, or having that focus within your life? I mean, what advantages does that give you?
Well, personally, I think feeling like you're really part of a community, I know there's been a number of studies that show that just good for your health, good for your mental health, all that sort of thing. Humorously, McCarthy is a very cantankerous town, and I originally set up shop there wanting to be part of that community. And unfortunately, being a successful business owner is not necessarily conducive to being loved in that community.
Yeah.
So I shifted my focus to focusing on my team, my little microcosm, my business. And, with 30 employees, that is not a small community to be surrounded by. And, within guiding is an exhausting profession. It's an intense profession. Almost everyone's doing it for passion. There's very little money made in guiding. As we like to say, we get paid in haircuts and coupons. That camaraderie that, and of course, guiding also can involve risking your life.
Yeah.
So it's intense in that way. And you really feel like you got to have each other's backs. So that camaraderie can get very intense. And I like that. I wanted that. I looked for every opportunity I could to cultivate that. Of course, within the context of trying to run a successful business, which is challenging.
Yeah.
Trying to keep your employees on task and in line, while simultaneously trying to be a band of brothers charging off into the war of commerce. So,
I'll tell you, I was blown away by what I saw those guides doing together. And as I'm watching a pair of guides help somebody drop into a Moulin on the top of a glacier, my adrenaline actually kicked up watching. I was like, I can't believe there's people who are crazy enough to do that. And I consider myself, at least mildly brave, in the sense that, like, I'm willing to do most things, but looking at dropping into the middle of a glacier, oh boy.
Yeah, there is something very unnatural about being lowered into a hole in the earth.
Yeah. And that to me was even like, I'm not going to say I went into some caves when I was in Okinawa, Japan. That was uncomfortable, right? The idea, because as obviously as we're walking across the glacier, because we had a guide with us, she's like, yeah, it's basically like if you drop into it and it's one of the ones that doesn't have a bottom, it's basically like a plumbing system for the glacier. And you'll basically just go down to a tube and we'll never see you again. Like, we have no idea where those go. I was like, well, that's a good way to keep me away from them. Probably the most solid sales pitch I've ever heard in my life was, don't go near that.
Hey, if you want to be an interesting archaeological find for, some dude 1,000 years from now, you can dive right in.
Be like, what's Levi? Be like, he must have been a god or something. Like, nope. It's just a bargain brand that became popular with hipsters and guys in their 30s who shop at Costco. So tell me then, do you have any like unusual habits that you think have improved your life versus, other people, in the sense that, like, people are like, why do you do that, Wayne?
I'm certain I have some unusual habits. Off the top of my head, the first one that pops to mind is I like to eat chocolate after I exercise.
Interesting. Seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, but it goes into a bigger philosophy, which is I think when you work hard, it's important to celebrate your victories. Too many people accomplish something and then they just move on.
True.
And I really think it's important to take those. I remember in real estate, when I got a first decent sized commission check, I went to this little bakery and I ordered a cake for myself. And they thought it was so unusual. Somebody was ordering a cake for themselves and I was going to sit down and eat it right there. But, and you can probably tell, I got a raging sweet tooth. So,
well,
that tends to be my go-to.
You have, yeah, I would assume you have to have the diet of a hummingbird to do what you do. Because it's not, even during the summer months in McCarthy, Alaska, it's not exactly warm all the time. And especially if you're fighting with the river constantly, that water's absolutely not warm.
Yeah, you got a lot of elements. Alaska's not warm, not known for warm weather. It's not known for, endless sunny days. Mosquitoes are drawing a lot of blood. And and you have no refrigeration, of course. We got to keep that in mind. It's off the grid, so yeah, it's not the greatest diet. Got to make do with what you got, but hey, chocolate keeps very well.
It does. I will say I would have loved to have seen a guy be like, I need a cake. Can you put my name on it? No, I'm gonna eat. I'll take that. Not to go for here. Please.
Yeah, don't bother with the box, honey. Just right here. Give me a fork.
Yeah, just send that on over.
But seriously, on the micro side, if you do a workout and you get a little chocolate treat at the end, I think it makes you a lot more likely to work out again.
I think that there's some Pavlovian, response mechanism involved with that. Yeah, especially if you have a sweet tooth. Makes sense.
Yeah,
to me.
I salivate all over that Stairmaster. So yeah,
you're like, oh, I'm at 29 minutes. I get a chocolate in a minute. Wee. That's actually, you might be onto something, Wayne. You might have just changed the fitness industry. Be like, look, eat your sweets right after. There's actually there's a guy named John Kiefer. He wrote a book called Carb Backloading. And it's just interesting that you're talking about this because his whole point is basically, you get all this debate about should you eat carbs, should you not eat carbs, should you eat high fat, should you eat non-high fat, and everything in the middle. The only thing that people universally agree on typically is protein intake, and then the rest of it's all fair game. But this guy, John Kiefer, what he was talking about is basically that post-strength training or post-training, as long as it's high intensity, right? Now, that's not like going and vacuuming your house, right? It's like real exercise. Right. And his point is basically that your body in that post-training environment, you need quick, high glycemic carbs because you have to replace your glycogen stores, right? Because that's the carbohydrate stores within your muscle mass, effectively. And I'm no scientist, but then basically for about an hour, 2 hours after that, everything that you're eating, especially if it's high carb, just basically goes straight into muscle building.
Huh, interesting.
And so you might have stumbled onto the secret that John Kiefer's talking about is that, you need those carbs right after you work out. And that's what your body wants because it's exactly what it needs. Plus you get the Pavlovian response of giving yourself a chocolate treat.
Now, I can tell you, I haven't done as much reading on nutrition as I'd like, and that's definitely going to be a topic I'll tackle sometime here soon. But my general observation in life has been I've heard so many theories on nutrition and fitness, and yet, just in broad strokes, the Japanese diet, which seems to be quite healthy, long-lived people, and the Mediterranean diet, which also has long-lived, healthy people, seem radically different from each other. And with my own experience, especially during that time period, I told you, keeping track of what I was eating, exercise I was doing, and how I was feeling. My personal theory is that we're all so genetically different, and our lifestyles are a little different, and what drives us is a little different, that you really got to tinker around with it for yourself to find out what works for you.
Yep.
Because I got a buddy who's all about low fat. He's extremely low fat diet. He's got the body fat of a number 2 pencil. And he feels great and he's been successful. And I think he's genuinely happy. I tried that for a while. I felt like shit.
Yeah. I
So
don't like
yeah,
low fat.
so I think that it's a somewhat complex combination lock to crack, but I think it's worth putting some time in because man, your personal performance definitely varies with diet and exercise.
Absolutely. I think the best way I've seen it to break it down, to simplify it to kind of a nuts and bolts conversation is the conversation surrounding macronutrients. And a lot less than, what specific foods should you eat? Because, this week gluten's unhealthy. The next week it's no, rice is unhealthy. No, all that's unhealthy because it's all genetically modified. No, don't eat meat. Yes, eat meat, but I'm vegan. And I have to tell everybody it's just such a wash. And the people that I've seen be successful time after time are the people who went to their macros and understood, okay, like this many carbs versus this many fat, and I'm going to play with that. And my wife, she does high carb. I'm somewhere in the middle. I eat pretty balanced. For a while there, I was high fat, and honestly, no real difference. For me, it just came down to, was I eating stuff that I made at home versus eating out and, getting, I haven't eaten fast food and I can't even remember the last time, but to me, that was the ticket out, was to your point, just tracking it and being like, I probably shouldn't have that. Probably shouldn't go buy this cake for myself and eat it in the restaurant.
Yeah. And I think this speaks to some of the stuff we've talked about, both in business and life, is that I think life is a more iterative process than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
And these days, with sound bites, technology, just the pace of society, everybody wants that shortcut. Here, give me the 1-page brochure on the diet I should have that works.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's how, if you really want to be successful, I think you got to put in the time and energy to figure it out for yourself. And there's tons of resources. This is not to say you got to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
But
I'm actually surprised. I'm surprised by how many people don't start with just reading a book on the subject, whatever the subject is. Pick 3 and start there. And along that kind of question, it as far as resources go, and I'm a heavy reader. I'm not sure if you are, but are there any books or resources that you would recommend to people just in general that have been very impactful for you in terms of living your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you, I am a heavy reader. I really enjoy reading, and across the board, recreationally, for business, for personal development, fiction, nonfiction, history. I like broad swaths. And I do think that is one of the traits of most of the successful people I know, is that they like reading. So as a fundamental attribute, I kind of feel like that's one thing you got to be doing, which is just generally you want to learn.
Yeah.
You enjoy learning about stuff.
Even if it's just to throw out the bad stuff. Be like, well, that was bullshit. And now I know why.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I've read a ton of books. A lot of them have been meaningful. And you take little bits and pieces from all kinds of stuff, and a lot of it just gets integrated into you to the point where I don't even know if I can quote the sources for a lot of the things I've learned.
Yeah.
But with the way you phrased it, are there a couple of books that were impactful for me? And I guess my top 2, which actually I give to my team leads so that we can speak a common language.
Yeah.
I am a big fan of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Obviously, politically, that some people love it, some people hate it. That you can get some pretty intense reactions to that book. But for me, at the end of the day, that book is about taking responsibility for your own actions and making things happen. That's what I took away from it. That was the meaning that I took that has meant a lot to me. And also in a business way, that book has a very good deep dive into why it's positive for you and for the world to run a good business and to be productive. And I've found that inspiring because at times, owning a business can be glorified. Sometimes it's demonized. And I feel like that book gave me a little more solid ground on why I think it's good to run a business.
Yeah.
So
it allows you to direct resources at what you think is important. In my mind.
Yeah, that's certainly one reason. For me, what, like many idealist young people, I wanted to change the world.
Yeah.
And what I realized is anytime, and this is part of what I took from that book, is when you run a business, you're effectively saying, look, I have this product or service. I think it's valuable. Hey, customers and world, do you think it's valuable?
Yep.
And if they buy it, then they think it's valuable. So it doesn't matter whether you're changing the world, whether you're curing cancer, some of the big noble goals. I took people on fun trips. A lot of people would think that was a recreation or a hobby. But at its core, I saw it for what it was, which is people love traveling. They love adventuring. At the end of the day, most people, the successful older folks that I've talked to, there's two things they cherish, and that's great times with friends and family and the big adventures and travel they did.
Yeah.
Throw in a career, and you probably got the magic trifecta of what it is to live a meaningful life, a life well lived. And so I was a part of that.
Yeah.
We gave people trip of a lifetime, and I found that incredibly inspiring. So yeah, I'm not going to cure cancer. I'm not going to do some of the goals that some people would say are real change the world type stuff. But I've had a very meaningful impact on thousands of clients every year by delivering them an extremely cool experience in the wilds of Alaska. So that's what I'm all about. Or that was my takeaway, is that running a business is positive because you're just creating something of value.
Yeah.
And if you're successful, that's just showing that, hey, people appreciate it and they've made the determination for themselves whether or not it's valuable in their life.
That's exactly right. I was having that very same conversation with somebody just earlier this week, as a matter of fact, because we were talking about the difference between nonprofits and for-profits, and the discussion. Yeah, the difference was really in terms of, my point was that businesses aren't inherently evil. And that was basically what the discussion was, is our businesses evil, have the corporate overlords begun to abuse the general populace. And I'm like, well, yeah, sure. Some of them are. Business is in itself not inherently evil, at least in my mind, because people self-select into it. And you tell me if it's worth your money, because I'm solving this problem. And I think that it's worth this much to you. And you're saying, yeah, I agree. And that was totally worth it, or no. And if it wasn't, I can give you a refund, right? Assuming that I'm a reputable business person that cares about my reputation and maintaining that, versus, I'm not going to bash on nonprofits too much, because there are some really good ones, but they can be just as exploitative and abusive as anybody else, right? They can pull money and not drive it where it needs to go. I think we see that all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's the person behind it more. So, you talked about Atlas Shrugged. What was your other top two?
My other top two, which again, you've pegged me as pragmatic. My other top two would be Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, I think it's a favorite tome of many people, especially if you're not that organized or haven't been that good at prioritizing in the past, which I was not prior to reading that book. Or you could say I had some fundamentals, but it wasn't a cohesive system. And I just think that book is genuinely fantastic for just making you more efficient, more organized, and going back to our goals, prioritizing what's important.
Yep.
Figuring out where you're trying to head.
Yeah, it was equally life-changing for me. And I'm known amongst my crowd as somebody who's very organized, and I was blown away by that book. When did you read it? Because I feel like it's been around for a while.
Yeah, it has been around for a while. I probably read it 2005-ish.
Okay.
So 15 years ago now. And probably one of the reasons it was so impactful, as this happens when you read a book at just the right time, that's when it makes the impact. And I read Getting Things Done when my business felt incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I even read it, sort of stewed on it for a year. And when I finally took the action on it, it was definitely an epiphany of, oh, this is what running a business is supposed to be like.
Yeah, it doesn't
You're
have to
supposed to be making decisions on what's important, what's not, what are you going to spend your time on, what are you not going to bother with, and get it down to a manageable bite, a manageable chunk that you can actually take care of in a human day.
Yeah, you don't have to be superhuman. It was mind blowing for me. Just the little stuff, like the hard edges on the calendar, having not touching things twice was a big lesson that I took from that book. Just move it to the next phase, whatever the next phase is. Don't sit there and dwell on it. And for me personally, email is that monster for me in the loads of social media notifications and people spamming me, and it's just a nightmare. All right, so you've got those books. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm right there with you, and I'll just add that the maybe someday file is an important one for me.
What was the name of that?
The maybe someday file.
Maybe so. Oh, okay,
part
maybe someday. Yeah.
Not touching twice was you're supposed to decide. Okay, is this something short I can say right now? Is this a longer action? Identify the action and schedule it, or is this maybe someday I'll do this, but I'm not going to waste my energy on it now.
Yeah. Yeah. What I started doing was utilizing, I use HubSpot for it to solve that problem. What I basically do is any of these things that pop into my brain, what I do is I go and create a project file on it per David Allen, right? Because it's a multi-step process. It's not just a singular task. So I create the project file and I brain vomit all the tasks that I can think of associated with getting that to that end. And then I put it into a projects awaiting decision folder. And what I do is I review that folder monthly on my HubSpot. And I'm like, okay, do I still actually want to do this? Is this still important, or is the needle moving without this? And that's the process I personally use. But I agree, the someday, maybe never, if it's going to be never, just admit it and delete it, throw it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked about good books. Let's talk about bad advice. Is there any advice out there, whether it's relevant to life or relevant to business or just, the industry that you happen to exist in, that you hear being given a lot, that you're just like, oh, it just makes you want to tear your hair out?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of bad advice out there. So that is a long list. Hey, Ray, I'm getting interviewed right now. All right.
So we're talking about bad advice that people should ignore.
Yeah,
specifically in business.
You could have gotten a lot.
Yeah,
you could have got a lot of good advice from
some good sound bites.
She's loaded with it.
I'm telling you, they're straightforward. Children will cut to the core of you. I found that out from my nephews.
Yeah, the other day she was telling my wife what a bummer it would be if I died, because then it would be boring around that.
Oh, damn. Oh, you're like, yeah. See, did you take that as a win? Did you go buy yourself a cake after that?
Shut up. Cupcake.
Yeah.
So, talking about bad advice in life, probably the thing I hear most often that bothers me, because I am an entrepreneur. I do love running a business, small business, and the way that people talk about how business is too risky. That I just think that's bad about, I've heard it phrased in a whole bunch of different ways on that you shouldn't start a business because the rate of failure is too high, or, you work too much, or this, that, or the other. And absolutely, there are tons of risks in business, no question about it. But I think a lot of those can be mitigated by thoughtful action and hard work. And if you own a business and sculpt a life that integrates your business and some of your passions and other things that are important to you in life, family, diet, exercise, the whole 9 yards, that can be an incredibly rewarding life.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people never make the jump because they just get the bad advice that starting a business is too risky.
What is it, do you think, that fuels that advice? Because I hear the exact same thing, and you're right. It's couched in a bunch of different things, and I have my own opinions on why I think that occurs. But what is it that you think drives that advice being given out so frequently?
With the people that jump right to my mind that give that advice the most, it's because they're fearful.
Yeah.
So I think they're just letting out their own inner demons. And or maybe they don't want other people to make the jump because then they look bad.
Yeah.
But I don't know what I'm guessing it's just fear. And plenty of people have crashed and burned running a business. So I think some people are saying, "Oh, don't start a business because my uncle didn't. It ruined his life."
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But, how did your uncle go about it? What mistakes did he make? Could it be done differently? Because obviously not everybody crashes and burns.
Yeah.
So some people, it might be recounting a specific experience. Some people, I suspect it's their own fears that are holding them back.
That's been my experience too, is it's some form of scarcity mentality somewhere, digging into them and saying, well, the people who are giving it anyway, saying, well, if they're successful, I can't be, or it's the fear-based element of that scarcity mentality, or like, well, if this person leaves my business, and maybe it's somebody or coworker that you work with, they leave, my job will get harder, or whatever the case may be. And then for the people who were receiving that, it just further pushes them to that fearful edge. And I think like what we talked about earlier, starting your business from a position of fear, it ain't going to work, because you're just going to throw in a towel. You're like, my nightmares have come true, and just throw it in.
Right.
So takeaways for me that I got from this, and you can tell me if I've misinterpreted anything, but basically the need to be integrated is absolutely pivotal, and not just within the component of your business, though that you should take that to that, but within your life, within your relationships, with focusing on your body, how you handle your money, how you handle your business, how you handle those professional and personal relationships. There needs to be a cohesive function within that. I really liked what you said about the iterative process. Life is an iterative process. And for me, I've heard that couched differently, that basically nothing's a failure and everything's a test. And if you're approaching it from that angle, and why I think more people don't start businesses is they're not looking at it as a test. Because they're not looking at it as a test, they don't start small and scale up. They either jump in and go and get a bank loan for $3 million, and then they're hosed because they personally guaranteed it. Or they only bite at it just a little bit, and as soon as something gets weird, they're like, I'm done. It got too real. So the iterative process, that mindset, I think is a key takeaway for me. If I was telling a veteran, "Oh, hey, I talked to Wayne Mars yesterday," iterative process. That's how you become, the McCarthy guru. And then,
if I hear that, I'm buying a cupcake.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I think the best piece of advice you might have given everybody is eat the chocolate, man. If you have the win, eat the chocolate. I think that might be the most profound thing I've heard this week.
I go full blown. I seize candy. I pick them out myself, hand selected, not the cheap crap.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the key too, is you got to go gourmet, whatever your version of gourmet is, whatever you think is the top. Don't settle for Hostess if you don't want to.
Yeah, but hey, I'm a white trash kid from Indiana, so sometimes a good little Debbie is what.
Well, yeah, I know. I grew up in Oklahoma. It's same thing. You can't. I love Quick Trip, and I don't know if you're familiar with Quick Trip, and anybody who's from Oklahoma will agree with me. Quick Trip's the best, and that's because they have a whole wall of Slurpees that you can choose from, and they don't get mad if you mix them. So they built their whole business model on that, and kids like me, white trash kids.
Yeah, I'm from the mighty Middle West, so it's all about White Castle hamburgers. That's my Achilles heel.
There was actually an interesting story about White Castle. There's three, I want to say they were judges or lawyers, but they basically got into a early morning brawl at White Castle over some sliders. That sounds about right. Sounds about right. You can't be at White Castle and not get into a fist fight. But, those are my takeaways. Sum up for me, what do you think the important stuff is? What did I miss, or do you have anything to add?
Because we touched on it a number of times, I think having goals, so important, so fundamental. Work them out so they're clear in your mind, write them down and revisit them, and figure out, how do I really get, what are the steps I need to take? So for me, that's an important takeaway. It's such a broad one, but I still think it's absolutely key.
And it gets said so much, but people start to, do the nod and shake like, yeah, totally. I have goals. And then you're like, show me. And they're like,
yeah,
whoa.
Exactly.
So goals.
That is the first question I ask.
Yeah. Show it. Show me. And maybe that's because you grew up in Indiana. I grew up in, somewhat close to Missouri, the show me state. And I'm a believer. Show, don't tell. All the time. I talk about with that.
And if they actually show me, then we get to dork out about
exactly
and how they set them and milestones, how all that kind of stuff. But
kindred spirit.
Yeah, but as you're wisely pointing out, 8 times out of 10 they got nothing.
Yeah, and they seem to be the same people who are very upset. Like they're the people that come in and complain on Mondays. Like, oh, I hate this job. I'm like, you don't even know why you hate it. You haven't even gotten that far. You haven't even defined what you don't like. If I hate something, I know exactly why I hate it in fervent detail. Like I at least wait.
And then you tell that same person about a great business opportunity, and what do they tell you?
It'll never work. It'll never work. Wayne, this is great, man. I think that I think you speak to the heart of the veteran community. I think you're a kindred spirit, and I think this is going to give some people some very fantastic insight as far as what going and building a business and living in the middle of the woods actually looks like. You actually have to be a savvy businessman. It's not just sharpening your hatchet all day.
But as you and I both know, you don't even have to be a savvy businessman because you can learn on the fly. There's tons of books and resources.
Yes, absolutely.
That's another one that keeps people from doing it, is they just never quite feel prepared. And you know what? You never are.
Yeah, you are never prepared. I'm constantly caught with my pants down. I just don't show it. What I developed was a good poker face. Like, oh crap, I didn't think about that.
So I have to figure that one out.
Yeah.
Run.
All right, Wayne. Well, you enjoy your night. Thank you so much. And
all right. Well, I hope it was fun. I hope I gave you some good material.
Hey, everyone. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.